Hey there, Ride the Car Guy here, and this is the VK Swap wiring episode. Alright, a couple disclaimers and some suggestions before we get started. First and foremost, this video is just to show you what I did and how I did it. If you take on this task and even if you do exactly what I did and something goes wrong, not my fault. There's a lot of stuff to screw up and it's easy to do, so if you do decide to take on this task, be very vigilant, double, triple, quadruple check your work. Next, I will not be providing this as a service and I will not be able to help you troubleshoot it if something goes wrong. Troubleshooting wiring issues over like a call, text messages, or email is like borderline impossible. So if you do this, you're kind of on your own. And lastly, as I'm sure you know, Brennan from Driven Desire does provide this as a service. So my suggestion to you is to go work with him, try to get your harness over to him, have him do it, and send it back to you. Throughout this video, we'll talk about the reasons why. And on that subject, that's actually what I was going to do. I was going to send mine over to Brennan. He's crazy busy, and I'm work on a schedule where I get a video out every single week. So unfortunately, we didn't have the time to send it up there, have him do it, send it back, all of that. So I decided, hey, I'm going to figure out on my own. That way I can, relay it all to you on how to do it. There's going to be two main parts of this video. The first part is going to be wiring up the three sort of main connectors that come out of your engine harness, other than of course the ECM connector. And the second part's going to be wiring up your alternator, your starter, and your oil pressure sensor. If you've been following along in the series, then you know what I wanted to create was called a jumper harness. And that is basically taking the body side of the engine room harness out of the Titan and the male sides out of the Xterra engine harness, flipping them around and wiring them. That way we don't have to cut into the original Titan harness, nor do we have to cut into the Xterra to wire things in. So let's start with the basics. Like I said, we're concentrating on the three connectors coming out of your harness. And in the manuals, the way that these are labeled are E5, E2, and E19 on the Titan side, or the female side, and F14, F32, and F33 on the Xterra side. Now for the Titan and the Xterra, they're actually all named the same. So like the female side on the Xterra is also E5, E2, and E19. And the male on the Titan side are also F14, F32, and F33. So that actually really helps when we go to do our mapping, and you'll see what I mean about that later. So for the mapping, generally speaking, there's a little bit of crossover, but the E5 connector from the Titan connects to the F14 on the Xterra. E2 on the Titan connects to F32 on the Xterra. And E19 connects to F33. Now to make any of this possible, you're going to need the factory service manuals for the vehicles that you're merging. I already had mine, but if you don't have yours, they are available online for free. I'm not going to say exactly where, I don't want to get in trouble or anything like that, but if you just search for Nissan service manuals or factory service manuals, they are pretty high up on Google results. The only bummer is that they're actually split up by section, so you actually need to go back through and merge them all together as one PDF if you want to do that, but regardless, when you do get those, I implore you to start by reading the how to read the wiring diagram section. And I'll show you that now. All right, so in your manual, I'm looking at the Titan, the 2006 Titan manual, and this one is GI 15. Hold on, GI 15, so general information 15. Before you start diving in, if you read through this section, it's gonna make it a heck of a lot faster in the next step. It shows you, for instance, how it lays out the connectors, what pin is number one in each connector, and so on and so forth. Gives you an example diagram and what each one of these things means. The things you want to focus on here are number 10, number 11. Those are basically what you use throughout most of the wiring diagrams. And number 9, which you'll know later, caused me a lot of extra time. But I'm not going to go through this whole thing. Just go through it, read it, get an understanding, so that way when you do go through the wiring diagrams, you actually know what you're looking at. So once I had a decent understanding of that, I decided I'm going to start making a spreadsheet of all of the pinouts and all of the mapping for those three connectors. At first, this is going to look a little overwhelming, but we'll kind of go through it piece by piece. But first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to a user called Gots a Soul on irate 4x4. He had actually gone through and done pinouts for I think it was a 2010 Frontier to a 2014 Titan. And I used his mapping sort of as a baseline, and I modeled my spreadsheet off of the way he did his spreadsheet. So big shout out to him. Thanks so much for putting that work in. But it also brings up a really good point. He did a 2010 Frontier to a 2014 Titan. Mine is a 2006 Titan to a 2006 Xterra, and the mappings are different. So all the different combinations of vehicles, each mapping could very well be unique. I'm sure there's going to be some overlap, like maybe if you go 2007 Titan to 2006 Xterra or vice versa, those might be the same. But if you're doing different years, they are going to be different than what you see here, and they're going to be different than even Gatsa Soul from iRate 4x4. They're going to be different from his as well. So just because these pinouts are available for you does not mean they're going to work for you. That's another reason why sending it out to Brennan is a good choice. He accommodates for all that. He knows all the combinations and just does it for you. But if you do happen to be doing a 2006 Titan to a 2006 Xterra, then you might just be in luck. Up here, I just had the connector names from the Xterra and the connector names from the Titan and what size they were. The one here, F34, we'll talk about later. That's just the starter. It's going to be a big single wire, but these are the ones we're going to concentrate on first. I also just had this mapping to help me remember that E5 goes to F14, E2 to F32, and so on. I also put the color indicators here. These are the colors that are used on the wiring diagram, and it's in the how to read a wiring diagram section, but I didn't want to keep going back and referencing it, so I just put it here. Those are personal notes. Don't worry about those. Those are discrepancies. Actually, I'll bring this up. This is a good point. These are some of the discrepancies from the 2010 to 2014 mapping and my mapping. So they're not the same, but don't worry about that. And down below, these are just the screenshots that Gatsa Soul sent me on iRate 4x4. So we're not actually going to use those. The meat and potatoes of this is the connector pinouts. Now the connector pinouts, I'll zoom out just temporarily here. I started by going through the manual and finding where the connector was in every single wiring diagram and then marking it out on here. So if we focus in on E5 as an example, I have the top is all the Titan female connectors. Then I have the connector number, E5, E2, and then so on. And then under each one is the pin number. So pin number is 1 through, in this case, 24. Then what I did is I went in, and I'll show you this process in a minute, but I went into the Titan factory service manual, and I literally searched for the word wiring diagram, which is kind of the silver bullet here, and then found and looked at every single wiring diagram in the entire 3,700 page manual and found where each one of these connectors were. Once I found out their color and where they went, I came back here, I documented it. If it goes directly to the ECM or TCM, I put the port number in there. And then I put the manual page number and the document page number in. This is super critical if you're gonna map it yourself. Because later on when you do your mapping, you're gonna be able to go look specifically at that page quickly and go look at the wiring diagram and compare them side by side. I did the same for E2, as you can see here. And then the same for E19. Now let me go show you how I did that in the manual itself. So I'm gonna open up the Titan one. You can do the Titan first. Doesn't matter which one you do first, of course. And the beauty is in this document, the text is searchable, right? Most of it, not images, which is kind of the big kick in the you-know-what, but the text on the document is. So if we do Control F and we type in the word wiring diagram and hit enter, it's gonna find them. And it found 569 instances of the words wiring diagram together. So if I just click through, there's a bunch of them that aren't actual wiring diagrams. That first one was an example. All right, keep going. Okay, look at this. We've already been through 74 of them, of the instances. So sweet, we're already into the 400s. What we do is we start to look around at the connectors, and we are looking for, since this is the Titan, we are looking for E5, E2, and E19. And if you read through your how to read a wiring diagram section, you know that right here are connectors. So let me zoom in on this. And look, we already found our first one. F32, E2. So it's saying that connector F32 plugs into E2, which we already established, right? If we go to our general info, we know that E2 plugs into F32. Fantastic. And here we go. It says 6, this number 6 is the pin inside of the connector. So it's in position number 6. This B indicates that it is a black wire and it looks like it's a ground of some sort. So we would go back to our document and we would say, okay, E2, pin number 6 is a black ground. So over here, I go over here, pin number 6, I type in black, I make sure I color it. It is a ground. Awesome. And if it goes directly into the ECM, it says right here, ECM, and it's a ground, port number 1 in the ECM. So I just put that in there and say, okay, this is port 1. It doesn't go to the TCM, so that one's blank. And I mark down, okay, where in the manual is it? Go over here, we scroll down. It says right there, EC 151. And in the document itself, it's page 367. It's kind of hard to see. It's at the very top here. All right, very cool. One down, 111 to go. And what's nice about this is that in each wiring diagram, down below, you're going to see the connectors that it references. So right here, you're going to see that it references E16 and F54. Down here, it shows you E16 and F54. Also, it references F32, which is the one we're interested in, and E119 up here. If you look down here, it shows you F32 and the pinout. This is a little bit of a hack as well, because as you're going through these wiring diagrams, if you just scroll to the bottom of the page and see that it includes F32, then you know F32 plugs into, what was it, E2? Yeah, F32 plugs into E2, so there's going to be something on that wiring diagram that you need to record. Let's do another one as an example, and then we'll move on. I'm going to keep clicking next on my wiring diagram search until I get to another actual wiring diagram. All right, CAN communication line. Right away, we see that this is E16 at the bottom, and it's 2 CAN lines that go from the ECM to the CAN. We don't care about that, right? So, no useful information. Let's keep going. All right, we found another one. I hit next, and it says here, E5F14, pin 20, red, black. Awesome. So now we know, remember, we're looking for the E's on the Titan side. So we know that E520 is red, black, and it goes from the IPDM to the air fuel ratio sensor 1, bank 1. And down below, again, here's another tell. F14's down here. And since M14 plugs into E5, we know that there's something on this wiring diagram that we need to document. If we come back to our document, we go to E5, we go to 20, we type in red and black. It doesn't go directly to the ECM or TCM, but it goes to air fuel ratio sensor. You'll notice I have multiple things listed here. So something to remember, some of these wires can go to multiple items. Like for instance, this one I think is wired into 4 things. I think it's wired into both oxygen sensors and air fuel ratio sensor, 2 sensors, and I think the MAF? I don't know, doesn't matter. I would have written it down if it was the MAF. No, that's MAF over here. Okay, so 2 things, 2 oxygen sensors and 2 air fuel ratio sensors. And let me show you that in practice, because if we go down to the next wiring diagram in our document, you're gonna see the same exact thing. Red, black, E514, pin number 20, and it goes this time to a heated oxygen sensor 2, bank 1, okay? And the other one was air fuel ratio sensor, right? And you're gonna find that if you keep going, you'll find the other ones as well, and they all go through that same wire. One more thing I wanna mention before we move on is, as a practice, when you're looking at these wiring diagrams, go to the next page. So, like I said earlier, that number 9 in that example diagram really cost me a lot of time, because I went through this whole document, and you'll see it is 3,788 pages. And by the end, I found that my mapping was not full, right? So my pinouts, I had pinouts missing, and I was like, what? I'm like, I went through the whole thing. Where the hell are they? Well, the problem is that in here, you're gonna see this says next page. Now here's the problem. If we look right here and it says next page, on the next page, there is going to be a wiring diagram, right? Right there. But here's the catch. Look in the upper left-hand corner of the page. Guess what's missing? The words wiring diagram. So not all wiring diagrams have the word wiring diagram at the top. So there's a flaw in our search. When there's a multi-part wiring diagram, they move it on to subsequent pages, but then don't put that header on. So as a practice, even if it doesn't say next page, scroll down to the next page or 2 after you look at a wiring diagram and make sure you see all of the basically corresponding wiring diagrams. Because guess what I had to do? Since there's no surefire way to figure out what I missed, I had to go back through all over again and find the missing pins. Once you finish on the Titan side, just go grab the Xterra manual and do the exact same thing. And you end up with this, which is the full mapping of the 3 main connectors. Well, that's great and all, but how do you know what goes to what? Well, here's how I did that. In a section called mapping, I started out with the Xterra side. So what that means is I took the Xterra harnesses and said, okay, These are my main harnesses. These are the ones that are basically going to be sitting inside the Xterra that we need to plug into. Now it's going to seem a little backwards because F14 is technically a male connector, right? It's the one that plugs into the Xterra, but they're really the same thing. The pins are going to be the same. So I took all those and I listed them out on the left side of my spreadsheet. You'll see here F14 Xterra, all those pins, 32 Xterra, all those, and 33 Xterra. Now, these are the exact same. If you go to the connector pinout section, these are literally just these down here. I just moved them over to the mapping page. And then I did the same for E5, E2, and E19 from the Titan, and I put them on the right. Once they were all on the same sheet, I came over here and I started at number 1 on F14, and I said, okay, it says ground A, cruise control switch, ASCD. Cool. I went over to the E5 Titan side, I found it, and it was at pin 16. Ground A, cruise control switch, ASCD. Great. Then I merged them together. I put this row right here next to this row, and then I continued that process all the way down. So in this one, there's 24 pins, and over here on the E5, not all of them get used. Some of them get crossover. We'll talk about that. But in here, I have all the pins matched up. So now I know 1 goes to 16, 2 goes to 3, 3 goes to 14, and then so on and so forth. Once I matched up based solely on description, I then went back through again and I grabbed 2 documents. I opened up my Adobe Acrobat or whatever, and then I came in, and to finalize these or to verify them in my head, I opened up one document on the left, that was my Xterra, one document on the right, that is the Titan, and then I went to each of these document pages and I made sure they were the exact same wiring diagram. They were actually the correct wire. So let's grab an example and I'll show you how I did that. So in here, let's use the K line here. It says AT port 4 K line. I don't know what that means, but sounds cool. Sounds like a train or something. Okay. All right, so I have the Xterra on the left and the Titan on the right. And I want to verify this particular mapping. I want to verify F1414 to E518. And this is why taking the actual document number and putting it in the spreadsheet is so critical, because now I know that this is on page 1256 in the document, and this one is 1059 in this document. So I go over here, 1256. There it is. And over here, 1059, bang, there it is. Now I have the actual diagrams for this particular line from both vehicles right in front of me. So if we look at the Xterra first on F14, so if we zoom in here, we see that F14, pin number 14 is purple. V stands for purple, they go for violet. It goes into the transmission at port number 4, and then into the TCM at port number 6, and it is labeled K-line. Then we swing over to our Titan, zoom in, we see that E5 F14, so in this case E5, pin number 18 is purple, goes into the transmission at port 4, and goes into the TCM at port 6, and it's labeled K-line. So now I verified that this is the exact wire mapping. I know that this wire from the Xterra goes to this wire on the Titan harness. Then once that one's done, you just got to do it another 55 times. Now this process took me twice as long as pulling both engines combined. No joke, I spent probably 15 to 17 hours doing everything that we've talked about up to this point. I am glad that I did it because now I feel like I know a lot about the Xterra and the Titan and how they connect. But in retrospect, I probably would have just waited for Brennan to become available and just push the project. But I hate doing that when I'm making a set of videos. So regardless, we did it. It's done. It's here. And then the next step is actually physically connecting them. Now, at first, I actually took electrical tape and I just sort of twisted them together and taped them up. And my thought process behind that was I'm going to test it all, right? So I have it all wired up and I'm going to test it. And then if it's all correct, then I can go pull it back out and then actually do the solder type connectors. The problem with that is that I know myself, and if everything worked and I didn't have to pull it out and fix anything, I probably would just leave it in there until something went wrong. So I went ahead and went forward with actually doing the solder type connectors. And then if something had to be redone, I would just cut them and redo them. For this, I grabbed my trusty old Harbor Freight heat gun. And then I went on Amazon and bought a huge pack of those shrink wrap solder type connectors. Then all I needed is my little iPad with my wire mapping up on the screen, and of course the harnesses. The connectors are pretty simple. You literally just straighten your wires out and then join them together head to head. And I like to do a little twist on them. The directions just literally show you sort of just putting them together, and then the solder is supposed to hold them, but I put a little twist on it, and then you slide your connector over top. And once you have it aligned, you just hit it with a heat gun. Now this is the first time I've ever used these, so I actually practice. I installed a radio in 8-ball, and I practiced on those first as to make sure I wasn't gonna burn through these or screw them up. You just hold the heat gun really close, and the whole thing is shrink wrap, but in the center there's a solder ring, and then there's 2 adhesive rings on the outside. So the goal is to make sure that not only is the whole thing tight to the wires, but that the adhesive actually melts, and that of course the solder melts. So I just gently worked it around the connection until everything was nice and tight. The adhesive was melted, and then the last thing to go, of course, is the solder. And the real genius of this is that since the solder is also inside of your little shrink wrap, it actually forces the solder through the connection. When you heat it up, you're gonna see that it goes almost entirely transparent, and then as it cools, it goes to a more translucent look. So I did each one of these very methodically and slowly, because as to not, of course, screw anything up. But I let each one cool before moving on to the next one, because if you put any pressure on them while they're still really warm, they could separate. So just be careful for that. Then once you get the first one done, again, let it cool down and then do it 55 more times. And then what you're left with is this. You have your connectors, and in this case, again, I'm making a jumper harness. So this side right here plugs into the Xterra, plug, and then when I'm ready, I take my engine harness, I just plug it into these. There's a third one, but I don't want to get up and get it. All the connections feel really good. Again, this is my first time using these, and I'm pretty impressed by them. They're pretty great. So for me, I feel like in this particular scenario, they're going to be a way better solution than butt connectors. My only fear is finding a way to sort of stuff all of this into the IPDM box. So that might be a bit of a chore. We might have to figure something out there. But all in all, I'm pretty damn proud of it. This represents, at this point, probably 20 hours of work. And hopefully everything's going to work when we plug it in. We'll see. With these being sorted, it does leave us with 3 other things to tackle. We have the generator or alternator, we have the starter, and then we have the oil pressure sensor. So let's actually get out of the office and go talk about that. All right, here is the Xterra. We call it the generator sub-harness or the alternator sub-harness. Technically it has the alternator, the starter, and the oil pressure sensor all ran in this sub-harness. You'll see there are some very large connections at the top. There's a ground wire, and then here's 2 positive wires that go to the battery. And then right here you have this connector. It has technically 7 cables in it, 6 small and then 1 giant one. When I got to this point, I was pretty, we'll say mentally exhausted, and I was just ready to activate cheat mode. So I was talking with Brennan, and I was like, hey man, can you just tell me how to handle this harness? And thankfully he sent me all the info. So big shout out to you. Thank you, man. For starters, we can tear this harness down and take out wires that we don't need. If you look at the harness, it's pretty obvious to see what's what, right? This plugs in right in front of the IPDM box. This plugs in behind the battery. And if you go down here, you're gonna see that this is the alternator connections. Because if you think about the way that the engine is, right? When you take it down, it starts at the top. You go down, you hit the alternator first, then it swings down and it hits the starter and the oil pressure sensor. So that means down here, this is our oil pressure sensor connector, and all these go to the starter. This main line for the starter can come out, and this small line comes out. Technically, I'm gonna take it out right around, well, I'll take it out of here. So we can take it all the way out of this, and we can take this one out as well. So now comes the sort of nerve-wracking part where we're gonna start cutting into this. You gotta be so careful when you're doing this. I just have a little box cutter. If you cut too far and cut into shielding on your cables, you're gonna be in a world of hurt. So be slow and diligent here. I'm gonna start by cutting off these. These are gonna have electrical tape around them. If you pull these off, you're gonna be able to get a little screwdriver and pop off these connectors. If you're not, of course, recording yourself like I am, make sure you remember generally where they went. It probably won't matter putting these on right where they came from because they likely won't be in the same locations. For these connectors, you just gotta find where they connect, and I pull up. So right here, go like that. They should come apart. Come on. There we go. Same with this one. Now that that's free, we're gonna find the seam on our main harness. And it looks like it's right here. Kind of see a distinct line that runs down it. So I'm just gonna very gently cut that tape and then start to pull it away. There we go. And then I'm gonna go all the way down here. Again, I'm basically like dragging my knife, guys. I'm not like pushing down on the knife, because I think that will only end in tears. Now, if this is healthy, I'm honestly probably gonna reuse it, because I don't wanna go buy like 4 feet of loom. So there's that. Holy crap, those wires are giant. I'm gonna keep going. We have the second one here. Again, we find our seam right there. It's pretty obvious once you find it. And again, I'm basically scoring the tape. Nothing more. Excellent. That portion's out. And now we have most of it exposed, actually. So let's find our cables we don't need anymore. And that is this one here. This is the big harness for the starter. There's a little bracket on here. And there's our cable for the other cable for the starter that we're actually just going to flip back. So, all right, and that separates it up here. And here's what I'm going to do. When I take this stuff apart, I'm immediately going to retape the wires that need to stay together. That's important to keep organized because it's just going to be a nightmare otherwise. I'm taping our remaining 2 wires, and I'm just going to basically do that same thing 2 more times, it looks like. So come over here, cut these 2 loose. There we go. Unwrap. All right, tie all these together again, just like before. Oh, I already forgot something. We actually take the oil sensor wires back up as well. So let me cut those free. I'm thinking like one thing at a time here, but there we go. So we actually want to take those as well. So we're left with the ground that just goes to this ground up here. So it's really just a block ground, right? Goes from the engine block to the body. Now we tape these up. There we go. Another one for good measure. And then do that the 3rd time up top. And now at this point, your starter cables should actually fully come out. So that's that one. Okay. That's your Xterra starter cable. Don't need that. This one we will technically need, so just flip this one back for now. That's the smaller cable that goes to the starter. And your oil sensor, your oil pressure sensor, flip that up as well. Now, main starter cable's gone, ground is here, that's fine. Alternator 3-pin connector, alternator battery cable. And then on the other end, we still have our alternator battery cable, the other side of that ground, our 6-pin, but we also have our starter small cable flipped back and our oil pressure sensor flipped back. Now the nice part is we want to maintain this. We want to just be able to plug this into the Xterra as it is and not have to worry about it. But what's running through here is that main starter cable and your oil pressure sensor. So they need to go somewhere, right? That's where the 4th connector from the Titan harness comes into play. This one here. I cut this out of my Titan, and since the Titan starter is up in the V, right, in a totally different location, it's just ran separately, and this harness doesn't even exist in the Titan. So this now needs to be wired into the white wire here. That way the wire comes out of the VK56 wiring harness. So it comes from the starter into this. This will be wired into this, which then sends the signal back to the Xterra through this. Or really the signal from the Xterra makes it to the starter. You get the idea. For our oil pressure sensor, these 3 wires, you have a black, a gray, and a white. Those you're going to find get wired directly into, what is it, F or E, into E5 it looks like. So there's some extra wires on E5. Those get wired in here. And then when that plugs into the harness, it sends that signal back over to the Xterra so it knows the oil pressure. Now for my lengths, I'm actually going to go test fit this so I know how much of this I can cut off and still get away with wiring it correctly. And then we'll wire them up. Now to do that, I'm going to take the harness I created here, a little jumper harness. I'm going to plug F14 in to its original place, perfect. And here are the 3 cables for our oil pressure sensor. So if I set this aside, well, we can actually just plug this in as well. So we kind of get an idea of where everything's going to sit. Cool. And then this one here, we'll tuck back. All right. And I also put, I think this is, what is this, like F40, I think plugs into this. Slide it in here. And I know that I'm going to mount this ground right here, and this plug plugs in right here. So the reason I'm doing this is I want to make sure that everything is plugged in to where it's going to go. And this guy goes to the battery here. So there you go. And then I want to bring my wires up, the ones I'm going to cut, and I'm going to judge how far I'm going to cut them down. So they're going to be like this, and they come in here. So we'll be safe right around here. Perfect. So I'm going to cut them here and then wire them up. Pull out the rest of our connectors. Pull this guy up. Awesome. Bring it back over. All right, I'll just put a bend in it so I know. There we go. That's where I want it cut. Okay, I've collected all the crap that I need here. So we decided that right here, I'm gonna cut all 3 of these oil pressure sensor connectors, or wires that is. There we go. And that's a pigtail for the oil pressure sensor for the Xterra, which we will never need again. Goodbye. And then we decided to cut here, but I have this here, this little guy, like I said, I cut out of the Titan. So I'm actually gonna accommodate for that. There we go, so I'm gonna cut here. Awesome, another pigtail, see you later. Okay, stripping these 2, get our appropriate size here, slide them together and heat them up. All right, there you have it. All right, for our 3 oil pressure lines, I'm just gonna strip all 3 at once. Just connect those 3 wires to the 3 wires coming out of E5, and then we can tidy this up. All right, with all that tidied up, we can use some of the original loom. So let me tuck all that here. There we go, this back, there. Now the big portion went up here, right? Yeah. So we flip these back, just push the loom back on. Do that all the way down. And then this, I mean, we can technically run this on these grounds, can't hurt. I'll just run a little bit of tape in a couple spots and we'll call it good. I'll clip these back on. I'm not sure where they're gonna end up going, but I'll just put them on here so I don't lose them. And then when we do the actual reinstall, we'll deal with them. For the added stuff, I got some red loom from like O'Reilly's or whatever, because it's sick as hell. And that, for the additional stuff, I'll run that in there. So let me flip that back. All right, you guys know how it is. That's 5 extra horsepower. So here we have it. We have the ground that goes to the block. We have our alternator, battery cable, and the 3-pin connector. Up here, other side of ground, other side of the battery cable, and our 7-pin connector, right? With our oil pressure sensor, starter, and alternator wires. Oil pressure sensor runs from here into my new loom, back to E5, and it looks like also E2. That other starter cable has now been terminated with our pigtail, and now everything should be able to plug straight into not only the engine side, but into the Xterra once we're ready to drop it in. There's one more thing to do before we end this video, and that is swap out our alternator if we have to. And I say that because if the alternator on your Titan or your VK56 already has a 3-pin connector, then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to swap it out. It'll work with the harness that you've created. You just plug it in and you go. If you don't, which I don't, I have a 2-pin, then we need to pull it out and replace it with this one. So let's go do that. All right, we have 12 millimeter, 14 millimeter, and that can't be it, can it? That might be it, wow, okay. These are usually like, sort of like pressure fit in, you know? Need my old man kneeling pad here. Now, this should, yep, there we go. Make sure you smash your finger. Oh, that hurt. And then we just go grab our other one, and slap it on there. I even have the original bolt here because I'm so freaking prepared. Oh yeah, I forgot how much I hate this. There we go. I put the back on first. Oh, okay. Now it's really easy. It's like tension fit on here, almost. There we go. Hold it in place. Get that guy in there. Dinner's ready. There we go. That in, go down here, throw that in, and torque them down. Torque this one down to this spec, and this one, if I recall from my rebuild, I couldn't find a spec on this, so I don't know. Have fun. So now I'm going to take the harness, and back here, we're just going to connect, obviously, the 3 things we need, right? We need our connector to the alternator, we need the battery cable to the alternator, and then we have our ground down below. Now the ground, I think I'm going to run right here. There's a bracket back here, and it's the bracket for the power steering pump. It should work for the ground. It's a really big bolt, and it goes into the block, so that should serve our purpose. Let's plug in our 3-pin, plug that in, plug in this guy. There we go. It should be okay, right? Once those are connected, we can run it. Looks like there's a little clip here for this harness. So that's pretty great. Slide that into that. And then this goes up to eventually IPDM box. I'm going to do one last thing, and that is now that the harness is up here, the sub harness, I'm going to take the original VK engine harness, plug it into our little jumper harnesses that we made. There we go. Is it an absolute hot mess? You better believe it. But is it gonna work? I think so. But with all this work of making these jumper harnesses, I now have a literal plug and play VK into an Xterra, right? These male connectors will plug directly in when we're ready, and that's it. That's all we need to do. So I'm gonna gently tuck these up here, make sure they're protected, and we're done. My gosh, wasn't that just the most thrilling video? It may have been extremely tedious, but there is certainly a part of me that's glad that I did it. I certainly feel like I know more about this than I ever really planned to know, so I guess that's a good thing. The unfortunate part is I'm probably never gonna do it again. Another shout out to Brennan from Driven Desire, who does this every day. Bless your soul. He sent me valuable information that I used to create this video, so if you do find that this is kind of outside your wheelhouse or a little more than you want to handle, then definitely check him out and send your harness his way. Plus another honorable mention for Gots a Soul from Irate 4x4, who did the original wire up for his 2 trucks and kind of gave me a really good direction to go in. Reminder, if you want to support the channel and the project, the Xterra tees are back out. Make sure you like this video if you liked it, subscribe to keep going with more Xterra and Titan stuff, or if this video saved you a lot of time or money and you want to say thanks by buying me a beer, scroll down and click that super thanks button. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching.